to the front portion of the room, please. Hear ye, yes, sir, ye. So, anyway, yes, I know it's 9 o'clock, you stupid clock. Okay, so who's got a question? Who wants to open up the discussion today with some great conundrum and dilemma on their minds? Anybody? Yes, sir.
I'm thankful for a lot of Christ and religion seem to be bubbling up. I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's better than when you don't hear anything about it. So
Yeah.
I think that
Yes. Well, good point, good observation. Bruce is observing a natural phenomenon since the time of Christ, if you really want it. The church, okay, here's Jesus. Here's the last day. The church militant, that is the church on earth, by that I mean the invisible church, the holy Christian church, the church of all believers, okay, will have many rises and falls, dips, curves, etc., before the last day. Okay? This is what happened in the Old Testament, this is what happened in the New Testament. If you want to extend this, you can go all the way back to the fall. Okay? And of course, that would be a downward one, first of all. Unless you want to count creation, of course. In the United States, for example, we can trace back religious risings, or a lot of people refer to them as revivals, and religious doldrums, religious low points, since the time of Jamestown and the Pilgrims. Jamestown, as you might remember, Jamestown was an economic enterprise, a commercial enterprise. It was not a religious enterprise. Nobody was founding Jamestown based on religious principles. Of course, the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock, a few years later, that was on religious principles. And that kind of thing actually is a good representation of the entire history of our country. A divergence or a playing off, sometimes very worldly, sometimes very materialistic, and sometimes more spiritual and more thinking about things of a moral, ethical, religious nature. Right? Since the time of the Jamestown founding and the Pilgrims founding years later, you've seen the same thing. In the early part of the 1600s, you had a lot of religious fervor. The founding of Massachusetts, the founding of Rhode Island, the founding of Connecticut, the founding of Pennsylvania, all of those along religious lines. Founding of Virginia, even along religious lines. Georgia, even along religious lines. Then you had kind of a falling away. People kind of got tired of religion. They got tired of religious wars. Remember the 1600s, we have the Civil War in England. This affected the colonies. This was a very bloody war, a very horrible, very terrible war, one of the worst civil wars recorded in Western civilization. People wanted nothing to do then with religion. And so we had a rise in materialism, a rise in worldliness, if you will, kind of a laissez-faire approach to religion, kind of a deism take hold. And that was true all the way through till about the 1740s. In the 1740s through about the 1760s, you had about 20 years where it was a revival. It was called the Great Awakening. You had a lot of preachers come over from England, come over from Germany, do a lot of what we would call crusades, a lot of revivals, going from church to church, or sometimes from community to community. Churches grew, so a lot of churches started, a lot of church bodies started. In other words, groups of churches joined together to form denominations. You had a real hotbed of religious activity going on. Then, of course, you had the 7 Years' War and the Revolutionary War. During the Revolutionary War, religion was a problem because, of course, you know, the English had a state church. And so every colony had a state church. It was the British church. And the king was the head of that church. He was the head of the Church of England. And so it was very difficult for the colonists, especially those who wanted to have their own country, wanted to be independent, wanted to rebel, but at the same time they belonged to the Church of England. And so this was a great difficulty. And so you had kind of religion again. You know, religion couldn't stop the Revolutionary War. As a matter of fact, people in the churches took sides, and pastors took sides, and these new early denominations took sides. And it was kind of a nasty, bloody thing. And so, again, people were turned off of religion. That continued till about the 1820s, 18 teens, 1820s to about 1830. Another Great Awakening, or what was called the Second Great Awakening. You had that was one of the biggest revival periods in the entire history of the United States. And one of the things that came out of that, unfortunately, was the cults. Out of that Second Great Awakening came the Mormon Church, came the Jehovah's Witness, came the Seventh-day Adventists, came the Christian Scientists. All of these cults arose during that period. And the reason for that was because that Second Great Awakening was a very legalistic thing. The preachers of that Second Great Awakening were fire and brimstone guys. And they preached a lot of hell and damnation and based on works. And they tried to get everybody to get on board with being more pious, being more holy, being more righteous, being more sanctified. And it was not a gospel-oriented revival at all. So folks, understand, religious revivals can be good, they can be bad. That was a bad one, because mostly what it produced was cults, non-biblical, anti-biblical, anti-Christian, anti-Christ cults. That's a bad revival. Then came the War between the States. During the War between the States, there was a great revival among the Confederate armies. Some historians of a religious bent would even say that God allowed the so-called Civil War to happen so that there would be a religious revival against the Northern Revival. Again, Northern Revival happened before, okay? Northern Revival, all the cults came out of that. Northern Revival was legalistic. Northern Revival was pietistic, based on sanctification, not based on the gospel. Southern Revival during the war among the Southern armies by the chaplains in the Southern Army was much more based on Christ, much more based on grace. Grace, 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 grace. Grace really was the centerpiece of the Southern Revival during the war. And again, many people would make the argument, many Christian historians would make the argument that that is why the Civil War happened. And they would even argue that the Civil War was actually a religious war. That it was, the reason the South did not want to be ruled by the North was because of religious reasons. They saw the North as, for the most part, being anti-biblical and anti-Christian, which in many ways was true. So I hesitate sometimes to embrace that too easily because there were so many reasons for the Civil War. And I hate to kind of put it in just religious terms because I don't think that's fair to history. But anyway, so that was another revival. And then after the war, we as a country became very immersed in expansion. We became very immersed in manifest destiny. We became very immersed in overcoming the rest of the continent, in expressing and spreading ourselves out, overcoming the pagans, the American, Native American, what we call Indians, and so on and so forth. Again, religion kind of took a hit, and people weren't real religious. A lot of churches didn't get started. A lot of churches took a big hit. Same thing happened in the 1890s. We had, again, the whole idea of American enterprise. You had the great trusts, the Standard Oil trusts. You had a number of economic difficulties during those times, a couple of panics on the market, and a lot of instability. And so it wasn't really a good religious time. And then right prior to the First World War became a great revival. And a revival started actually in Europe and made its way over to the United States. And this revival was sometimes referred to in history as the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. And it was a time of great optimism up till 1912, 1913. People were very optimistic. Churches were burgeoning at the seams. You had a lot of Pentecostal movements going on. You had a lot of charismatic movements going on. You had a lot of Jesus movements going on. It was a really giddy time in the church. And churches were just, a lot of churches were merging, a lot of denominations were merging and forming huge, big denominations. Congregations were springing up all over the place. If you cruise around the rural areas of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Ohio, Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, Illinois, you see a lot of markings on churches where churches were built 1910, 1912, 1909, 1913, 1914, and all that. A lot of churches, very common to have cornerstones seen from those days. Well, then the First World War happened. When the First World War happened, of course, we had all kinds of problems religiously, especially Lutherans. Lutherans had problems because up till then, most Lutherans were having their services in German. You can imagine the problem when the United States declares war against Germany, and people are out for a Sunday stroll, and they pass by St. John's German Lutheran Church in Racine or Kenosha or whatever, and they hear, Deutschland, whatever, going on. They don't like it much. And so a lot of Lutheran churches were burned to the ground, frankly, in the early years of the war, or the early years of our involvement in the war, I should say. And a lot of Lutheran congregations had to very quickly move from German to English. And a lot of congregations really were decimated by the war. Same thing happened during the 20s. During the 20s, you had some real anti-God, anti-church, anti-atheism, agnosticism, rationalism, science, and all that kind of stuff. Evolution really took off in the 20s. That went into the 30s, really a doldrums, went into the 40s during the Second World War, of course. People say, well, everybody went back to church in the Second World War. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. If you look at the facts, if you look at statistics, fewer churches were started during the Second World War. Fewer churches had any kind of expansion. Fewer denominations did any missionary work. It was really a down time for the church. Then, of course, you had the 50s. They had all these guys come back. They survived the war. All the promises they made to God in their foxholes, please God, get me home and I'll start going to church again, of course, a lot of them survived. They went home and boom, that's what they did. They started churches. And so, man, the churches just exploded. No time before, no time since has the Christian church experienced such a huge revival as during the 50s and 60s, really up till about 1971, 72. And the last of the baby boomers left home. Then you had another doldrums. That doldrums lasted for a while till the early 2000s. You had a little bit of a spark about that time. That's when the baby boomers started having children. They didn't have as many children as their parents did, but they had some, and so you had a little bit of an impetus up. But really, since the late 60s, since the 70s, it's been it's been down all that time. So the question comes. Let's just use 1970 as a peak here. So the question becomes, are we here on the way up at 2023? I don't know. I really don't. I think, frankly, I think we're about there. I don't think we've hit rock bottom yet. I really don't. I think that rock bottom is still a decade away. If demographics are to be believed, and they've been pretty accurate up to this point, there will not be enough members around to support a church like this. Most of you will be in heaven. Your children will not be here. They will not be sitting in these seats. Your grandchildren will not be sitting in these seats. If, again, demographics are to be believed. We will not be able to pay our bills. I think the government will begin taxing us. There was just this weekend, last weekend, there was a case in San Diego, and that's the only reason I know about it because I read the San Diego paper every morning. There was a case in San Diego where a Christian church was renting a public school. And in that public school, they had been there for 20 years. I don't know, you travel, when you travel to Tucson, you go through Huachuca City, and as you're going between Huachuca City 1 and Huachuca City 2, or 2 and 1, depending on how you want to look at it, there's that cross off to the left-hand side of the road. Y'all see that? Okay, that cross was put up my first year here. The Baptist church, Skyline Baptist Church, I think it's called, they meet in the school that's it's on the hill, the elementary school in Huachuca City. They bought that property in, I think, either the year I was here or the year after I came, one of the two, very, very soon, before the divided highway. Okay, they bought that property. That's very common in Baptist-type churches, to buy property and for it then to take 20, 25, 30 years or more to save up the money. They don't go into debt to build a church. That is not the Baptist way. And so they will take sometimes half a century to save up the money, to get the money together so that they can build their church. So someday there will probably be a church sitting on that hill where that cross is. In any case, places like that will be few and far between. Again, it's taken them a very long time, a lot longer than probably they anticipated. The church that used to meet in our church in Benson, the Wells Church in Benson, has gone belly up just a couple of years ago. It did finally build their church on the road to St. David, and it is now vacant, unless it's being used by somebody else, I don't know. And so I don't think we're at the end yet. I think when this church in San Diego, they had a speaker come in, and the speaker was a person who had been sexually abused as a child, was a woman, and became a lesbian, a gay. She lived that way for 20 years. At the end of that time, or towards the end of that time, she kind of found religion again. She read the Bible. She determined that homosexuality was wrong. She was revived, converted, however you want to say it. And she's now gone on a speaking tour telling people that, if you think you're gay, you don't have to be that way. Anyway, so she came in and she did a talk. One of the parents of one of the gay and transgender students at that school, public middle school, where they were renting the space to hold their services, attended that worship service. She had heard that the speaker was going to be there. She knew something about the speaker, so she attended and she recorded it. On, I believe it was Monday or Tuesday, she went to the school board, San Diego School Board, and she presented a petition with 600 names on it, saying that asking the school board to cancel the lease for that church to use the school for worship. Got a lot of support, and the article in the paper was very supportive, and the letters to the editor were very supportive. We should not be renting public school property to hateful churches. Okay. Now, the attorney for the school district rightfully said, we cannot determine who we're going to rent our facilities to based upon their religion. That's against the Constitution. That's against free speech. Well, then, of course, the arguments came back. Well, would you rent to a group of the Ku Klux Klan who wanted to meet in your church, or the Nazi Party, or the White Aryan Nation who wants to meet in your school? Well, that's different. Well, how is it different? Oh, I don't know. So I don't know how it's all going to play out, but this just gives you an idea. You can ask Terry, if he comes today, you can ask Terry about Canada, and he can tell you about numerous pastors who have been thrown in jail for preaching from the pulpit that homosexuality is a sin. In their own church, in their own pulpit, to their own people. And it got out, and the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, showed up, put the man in handcuffs, and put him in jail. So that's why I say in America, I think the X is not quite to the bottom yet. I think we got a ways to go. I think we got about a decade, maybe a little bit more to go before we really hit rock bottom. And then I think maybe the upward will be very quick, like instantaneous. Jesus comes back at that point. So that's just my historical perspective. So there I gave you 300-400 years of Christian history, and that's the way it goes.
Do you foresee or feel as though there's a certain happening or event that's going to take place that's going to cause us to hit bottom?
I don't think it. I don't know. I don't see in the history of these movements up and down. It's usually not one thing. It's usually a series of things, and the first few are missed. In other words, we only see those first inklings of a revival or a downturn looking back with 20/20 hind vision. We don't really see them at the time. I think, and that's the way it's always been. And therefore, that's why it's really hard to, you can't predict the upturn or the downturn. All you can say is once you're in it, as you're going up or as you're going down, you can look back and you can say, aha, things Bruce was pointing out, the things, we got this revival at this college, we've got a lot of Jesus movies coming out, Jesus videos, Jesus internet things, church on the internet, sharing, spread out all over the world, and so on and so forth. And, is this the real thing? Or is this like the one back in the 1800s that produced a bunch of cults? That's always the question too, is, where's this going to lead? Is this going to be a good one or a bad one? Okay. I don't know. My guess.
It was because of the end of Vietnam War, probably.
Well, it was again, if you look back at that, they had a Jesus movement, a little bit of a Jesus movement in the early 70s, but it petered out very quickly. It didn't last long. And that was the Jesus First movement. Lasted 2 years, maybe 3. It really didn't last very long, and nothing really came of it. Nothing. And so at the time, you could say, we're turning up after the hippies and the war protests and You say, and actually that wasn't the case. Actually, we were still going downhill. But you only see that if you look at history. You look back to see, and you look at the statistics.
Hindsight.
Yeah. So I doubt seriously. It has very seldom in history been a single event. Now, if you go back further into history, you can say, well, the Black Plague in 1349, 1351, that kind of was an impetus to a revival. Yes, it was. But I don't think anybody realized that at the time because millions of people were dying. Yes, ma'am.
And if we look at the history of the Israelites, whose behavior went
Yeah, like,
praising God,
yeah, right. Worshiping idols. Yeah,
God sent something.
yeah,
And we read in the Bible, so it seems like suddenly God was there.
yeah.
God was there.
Yeah,
And it's the same thing here.
yeah, yeah.
And
Yes, yes,
because all of the shootings,
yeah,
I can just see
yeah.
that demon next to that person.
Yes.
saying,
So can I. Yep, yep.
and I think that devil, that triumph,
Yep. Yep. I think we're getting and again, I'm just going to talk about America because, Europe, that's a kind of a more difficult question. And Europe probably hit rock bottom already a long time ago, but that's a different point. So I'm going to stick with America. I think you're very right. And I think what we're sort of going through right now is a 1-2 punch from God. It's kind of like with Israel, you can see that the taking away of the lost 10 tribes, and then 150 years later, which in historical is a short period of time, 150 years later, the Babylonian captivity. Boom, boom, a 1-2 punch to the Jews. Okay, I see the same thing happening to us within 5 years, 6 years. The plague, okay, COVID-19, boom, okay, big hit. The market was up. Remember, folks, I mean, and I'm not talking really politically. Again, I'm talking financially and that. But remember that until March, April of 2020, Trump was a shoo-in. Remember that. Remember, until he had to deal with COVID, he was a shoo-in. He was double digits ahead of any Democrat. And there was no Democrat who even wanted to run. You gotta remember that. He took a huge hit in May, June, July. And by the time he was renominated, it was a dead heat. And of course, you know what happened after that. Same with finances, same with the market. Market was going along pretty fine. I mean, when market was, since Trump was elected in 2016, it was a big bull market. I doubled my portfolio in 5 years. Okay? Wow, nice. I have lost all of that. It's all gone, every penny of it. And I'm into principle now. Okay? Which you will be all happy about if I have to stick around here another 5 years. So stop praying for that. Stop it. Anyway, so we had the COVID market political conundrum, blah, blah, blah. And then really, just in the last 6 months, Rebecca's right. I mean, we've had shootings now for, since Columbine, whenever that was, 20 some odd years ago, 22, 24 years ago. But good grief. Somebody said the other day there have been 600 shootings of more than one person in the United States since January 1st. Whoa, that's kind of, and the most ironic of all, did you read the article about the Pentagon and what they want to do with soldiers? This blew my mind when I read this. They want to make it wrong or illegal or impossible for a soldier Now get this, you can join the military at 17. Most of them do at 18, but no, you can join the military at 17. They want to make it illegal for a soldier to buy a gun until he's 25. So they're going to give him one when he's in, infantry at Fort Lewis. They're going to give him one, and they're going to train him how to use it and everything else. And then they're going to take it away from him and lock it up and say, you can't have it until you're 25.
And the rest of the people can.
I mean, and basically this is just because suicides in the armed forces have quadrupled. Well, and it doesn't matter whether they've been overseas or not. It doesn't matter, really. The ones who have been overseas, a little higher, but really, statistically, not all that much. Okay? So let me finish my point, Bruce, and then I'll get to you. So I think that's the violence. And I mean, there have been a whole bunch of knifings, people using swords, a lot of beatings, running people over with cars. And I think Rebecca's exactly right. I believe in demon possession, folks. I believe in it. I believe in it with all my heart. And I think God is allowing this 1-2 punch. Boom, the plague. Boom, the violence. And maybe even a 3 punch, a nice uppercut with this LBGTQ XYZ thing. Okay? Boom, boom, and boom.
And weather.
Well, yeah, I guess you could throw the weather in there too. So and again, a few years from now, we may be able to look back and say, aha, this was really what precipitated, hitting the bottom of that curve. Okay, that's possible. I think we're certainly on that road, that's for sure. Bruce first, then you, Richard. Bruce.
Well, just to go back to the military, I had a lot of friends in the military. And they think the depression is because it's no longer the military. It's a big woke thing.
Yeah.
And so they went into the military to defend our country, whatever the battle cry is.
Yeah.
But now it's, you gotta wear pink, or you gotta play your card. If you feel that your higher officer is offending you, you can play a card.
Yep,
literally
right,
a card.
right.
He has to stop talking to you.
Right.
It's like, this is where the depression comes in, same with the police.
Oh, it's worse than that. Those of you that share Facebook with me, you probably saw New York Times article. This was from, the Federalist, which is a very well-regarded, respected periodical, the Federalist, and which had an article the other day put on the internet, their internet version, that in the military, now the word went out to all chaplains, all recreational facilities, all physical fitness facilities in the military, and so on, that they must, repeat, they must allow transgender women, which are men, okay, transgender women to shower with biological women and vice versa. That is a law, a rule from the Department of Defense to all their forces. You cannot discriminate. If a man says, I am a woman, whether she's had the surgery or not to get rid of her male genitalia, if she says or he says, I am a woman, you must, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, you must allow her to use, him, to use the women's locker room and showers, on pain of demotion, tossing out of the army, loss of pay, loss of benefits, yada, yada, yada. Now imagine that. Just imagine that for 1 minute, that your young teenage daughter, 18 years old, graduates from high school, takes the MAFA or whatever it's called in the military and gets high marks and is sent here to Fort Huachuca to the intelligence school and, goes PT, comes back from PT, goes into the shower and finds a guy standing there in the shower. She can't complain. If she complains, she will be reported. She could get tossed out before she even finishes her training. That is the nation we live in, folks, right now. Okay? That is the nation we live in. Okay? And it wasn't that long ago, Clinton presidency, when don't ask, don't tell was about as far as they would go. Think how quickly, just think for a minute, how quickly this happened. When Clinton was president, even though he was an adulterer multiple times, he signed into law the Defense of Marriage Act, which said no state could be forced to recognize same-sex marriage. He signed that. Defense of Marriage Act. Joe Biden just recently signed an order expunging that from the law. It is gone. The Defense of Marriage Act no longer exists. And again, think how fast that happened, just in the space of a couple presidents. That's pretty fast. That's pretty.
Not one person in 100 that knows it.
Well, doesn't know it, doesn't care. Doesn't care. My kids don't care. And they'll admit that homosexuality is unbiblical, but they don't care. If their friends are homosexual, they don't care. Oh, they're a nice person. They're okay. Yeah, I wouldn't be one of them, but they're okay anyway. Not going to hurt anybody. They're not hurting anybody. Hey?
We need soldiers to hurt people.
You were going to make another point?
Yeah, this is dominating our military, yet we're getting closer and closer to war.
Yeah.
So we're setting ourselves up to fail.
Yeah. Does this play into where we are? Also, probably. And of course, you read multitude of articles about the Roman Empire and all of these things that are similar to what happened to the Roman Empire before it collapsed. So, all right, enough of that. I have some, as Ricky would say to Lucy, I have some splaining to do. You will notice, I'm going to skip that for today. We'll talk about that next week. You will notice that we ended our discussion of chapter 12 with verse 32. You will also notice, if you look at your Bibles, that the rest of chapter 12 goes from 33 all the way to 51. And you will say to yourself, well, Pastor, what did you do? Take a day off or what? What goes on here? We have no comments about verses 33 to 51. Well, there's a reason for that. Verses 33 to 51 are not all, but quite a bit of repetition. You will notice as you read through those verses that you will say to yourself, haven't we heard this before? Yes, you have. Again, not every word, not every verse, but quite a bit. And so what I thought to do when I was putting this together a month or so ago, working on this, I worked about that far ahead, is I thought, you know what, let's just skip to chapter 13. Let's not rehash a lot of those verses. So that's what I did. So that's why you have the last comment being made about verses 29, 30, 31, 32, and then boom, all of a sudden chapter 13. Okay, that's why. However, I do want to point out just a couple of things before we go to 13, because I think it's especially important. The first thing I would like to point out, verse 37, at really the end of 36, where it says they plundered the Egyptians. And it's an interesting word. That word is almost always used in English translations for the Hebrew. The Hebrew means the same as you would say the pirates plundered the ship. Now, plundered is a lot different word, or a stronger word than took, isn't it? In other words, what we have here is the Israelites not simply holding out their hands and the Egyptians saying, here, take this. But you have Israelites who are saying, oh, I'd like that. I'll take that, thank you very much. And the Egyptians saying, all right, go ahead, take it. Just get out of here. So you see the difference between, gee, thanks, and I'll want that. That's what's going on. Okay? So the Israelites took whatever wasn't nailed down, or maybe a lot of things that were nailed down in their leaving. 37, the important point there, 600,000 men of foot, or men on foot or of foot. This is soldier age. Soldier age in Old Testament was thought of as being anyone between 25 and 40. In some cases, younger than that. But you were a man at bar mitzvah, again, 12, 13 years old. That's true. But you were an apprentice from bar mitzvah to young adulthood. Let's say 21 maybe, or 25, somewhere around in there. You were an apprentice, and you weren't expected to be a full-blown soldier. You might be in reserve, but you wouldn't be a full-blown soldier. So if you want to say 20 to 40, or 25 to 40, or 25 to 45, or maybe even 20 to 50 at the very most, that would be about what we're talking about here. Now, if you have that many, if you have 600,000 in that age group, that's what gives us the figure of 4.5 to 5 million people. Because most of those in that group, after apprenticeship, you would be married, and you would have children. And most of the families were quite large. So you can take the 600,000 and multiply it times 4. And you could be pretty close. You could even multiply it by 5 or 6, or even more. Okay, we don't know. But we certainly don't have just, Cecil B. DeMille's extras crossing the Red Sea. You've got the population of Los Angeles, population of Phoenix, population of maybe New York even, crossing the Red Sea. Okay, so that's just so I wanted to point that out. One other thing to point out real quickly, verse 40. The time that the sons of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. 430 years. Now, you will hear different numbers in the Bible. Sometimes you will hear 400. That's rounding off, low. Sometimes you will hear 450. That's rounding off, high. So God does that in His Word. He rounds off for sake of simplicity. Remember, folks, the Hebrews did not have numerals. They did not have numerals 6, 3, 1, 3. They didn't have numerals. These are what? These are Arabic. These are from the Arabs. Without the Arabs, we would not have numbers. Without the Muslims, we would not have numbers. Okay? Let's remember that once in a while. I think it does us good. We use them every day. Lots. Roman numerals would be a lot heavier to use. Boy, let me tell you. Big time. Greek and Hebrew even more so, because Greeks and Hebrews use words. The word spelled out. Okay? Like one. Okay? The Hebrew for one is the Hebrew for one. They didn't use this. All right? So a lot of times God allowed His writers to round off, or he told them to round off. 450, 400. This we know is precise. Why? Because the verse actually says, to the very day. So if you're on Jeopardy, you get that answer, 430. You know what your question is. How long did the Jews stay in Egypt? Bingo, bingo. You win the car. Okay. A night to be observed by generations. We talked about that. No foreigners to eat of it. We talked about that. And how a foreigner or a sojourner could eat part of it. Stranger and so on and so forth. The law applies to you. So and so. That's enough. Okay. So, are we ready to move on to chapter 13, or do you have other questions? Okay, good. We've got some time. Excellent. Let us move on to chapter 13. Let's look just at the first couple of verses, let's say. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Sanctify to me every firstborn, the first offspring of every womb among the sons of Israel, both man and beast, it belongs to me. Notice here there is no male, female. It's just firstborn. Yes, sir. Oh, you didn't get that one. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Find page 63. Terry? Terry, is this yours by any chance? No. No? Okay. Might be yours? Okay. All right, moving on. Chapter 13. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Sanctify me. Okay, again, every offspring, not just male and female, not just male. That's for something else. Moses said to the people, Remember this day in which you went out from Egypt, from the house of slavery, for by a powerful hand the Lord brought you out from this place, and nothing leavened shall be eaten. On this day of the month of Abib you are to go forth. It shall be that when the Lord brings you to the land of the Canaanite, the Hivite, the Amorite, the Hivite, the Hittite, the Jebusite, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you will observe this rite in this month. Again, this is repeat. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the seventh day there shall be a feast unto the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten throughout the 7 days, and nothing leavened shall be seen among you, nor shall any leaven be seen among you in all your borders. Now, is this borders of house or borders of nation? Some dispute about that. We'll talk about that in a minute. You shall tell your son on that day, saying, It is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. And it shall serve a sign on your hand and a reminder on your forehead, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth. With a powerful hand of the Lord brought you out. Therefore you shall keep this ordinance and its appointed time from year to year. Let's stop there. Now, one other thing, real quick. Yes? Where? Yes, yes. The word in Hebrew is actually border. Okay? But your translation basically saying they decided it was a house. Yes. The King James people decided it was a house, not a country. But there are translations out there that will even say nation's borders. Yeah. All right. Let's look at the notes. Page 63. First, the note at the top. It may seem to us that the material in this chapter is arranged rather randomly. Many incidents are repeated, just like as I said. In fact, we hear of the actual Exodus itself several times. So, in the old saying, this is beating a dead horse. But boy, I tell you, the Lord likes to beat dead horses. He really does. And also the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Remember that in the Bible, events and pronouncements of God are often repeated. It is God's way of emphasizing. Please note that. Repetition is emphasis. This is called Hebrew parallelism. You want to jot that down? Hebrew parallelism. You say the exact same thing twice using either the same words or maybe changing just one little word, or you might even change lots of words. But you're still saying the same thing. You see this in the Psalms all over the place. Very, very, very often in the Psalms. You see the Psalm writer saying something and then saying the exact same thing using different words.
Pretty soon you start thinking it's all through.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is. It is. It's all through. Some Psalms more so than others. Some Psalms, the words are identical. God simply says something twice. It's exactly identical words. Same syllables, same consonants, same everything. And other times, no words are the same. Totally different words are used, but again, means the exact same thing. All of that is Hebrew parallelism. This is the way God emphasizes something. So if God wants something emphasized, he repeats it. If he wants it emphasized a lot, he repeats it a third time. If he wants it emphasized a huge lot, he repeats it 4 times, which is why we have 4 Gospels. Thank you very much. Give that lady a cheroot. Okay. Evidently, the Lord wanted to emphasize that all the parts of this great drama fit together and are closely connected. There would be no Exodus without the death of the firstborn. There would be no death of the firstborn without their substitution by the lambs. A hasty Exodus makes necessary the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You don't have time to let the yeast rise. The 3 are very much interconnected. So the leaving, the death of the firstborn, the lamb, the unleavened bread, all these things are interconnected. They interact and lean upon one another. They are completely interdependent on one another. You can't have just one. People ask the question, why couldn't there be an Exodus without this blood, without this death of the firstborn? Well, what's the answer? Herod had 9 previous opportunities to let the people go, and he refused. Yeah, Pharaoh, right. 9 times. That's the answer. It's not God's fault. It's Pharaoh's fault. All right? Okay? And that then necessitated, if God's going to kill the firstborn, but he doesn't want to kill a bunch of Israelites, well, that necessitated the sacrifice of the lamb, Passover lamb. That necessitated then, or caused the angel to pass over. That then caused the firstborn to belong to God, and so on and so forth. And of course, then leaving in a hurry caused the unleavened bread, and so on and so forth. So you see how all of these things are very closely interconnected. They happen all at once the same. So, letter A. Here is a more detailed explanation of the role of firstborn played in the story of the Exodus and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It should be noted that verse 1 and 2 go together with verses 11 through 16. We'll see that when we get there. It is a kind of introduction or preface to the last plague and the Exodus. God makes the statement that all the firstborn belong to him, both of man and animal. Truly, as the Creator, God could claim every living being, not just the firstborn. Psalm 24 puts this quite succinctly. The earth is the Lord and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. This is God saying himself, how he views us. This is how God views the world. This is how God views the universe, folks. It does not belong to us. At best, we are stewards. It belongs to God. Every molecule, every atom of our being, and every other being, and every rock, and every stick, and every drop of water, and every, you name it. All belongs to God. Lock, stock und barrel. And it is important to remember that, so that when God selects out a small portion and says, I want this dedicated to me, he's well within his rights. This is not something unusual. This is not something overbearing. This is not something cruel or mean. This is within his rights. We belong to him. He can do with us as he pleases. Finally, this is the answer when you get asked questions like, why does something happen? Or more succinctly, why do bad things happen to good people? That's usually the way you hear it. Why did this good person have his house burned down? Why did that such nice person, such maybe church-going person, very charitable person, very kind person, why did they die of cancer at 35? Or et cetera, et cetera. And you can try to find some rational, logical explanation, or even try to find some religious or spiritual explanation to connect all the dots. Fine, go ahead. If you can do it, do it. But you don't have to. All you have to say, all you need to say is, we belong to God, and he can do with us as he pleases. Period. Huh? I know you don't.
By saying it that way, it makes God seem capricious.
Yes, I know.
By saying that God does everything to get us to heaven, at least it shows his compassion.
Sure. Well, if you want to add that, you certainly can. And maybe that's necessary in most cases, maybe even all cases. It's necessary to do that. And that is certainly true. I know. But
Things in order.
Yes.
And that's what it shows us in Exodus. You're going to do it this way.
yes.
So just say, well, he does say, I will bless you, I will bless
Right.
you, curse you, I curse
Right.
you. But if I don't have that solid foundation behind me, I think it's
Sure. What you said about Esau and Jacob, that is the definition of capricious, isn't it? Yes, it is. So, yes, you either, let me put it this way. You either have to simply know that, and depending on who you're talking to, of course, has to simply know that all things work out to good for them that love God, that are called according to his purpose, Romans 8, or you have to say it. You either have to know it or you're right. You either have to know it or you have to say it. That's true. That's true. Yeah, I 100% agree. 100% agree. I think sometimes that, especially when you're talking to, let's say, an atheist or an agnostic or an unbeliever of some kind, it really doesn't do it much good to say, well, this is happening to that person so that somebody, maybe that person, maybe somebody else, gets to heaven. Because they don't believe in heaven. So that's why I said it the way I did. I'm assuming we're maybe in debate with a person who doesn't believe anything, certainly doesn't believe in the afterlife, and then you're throwing your pearls before swine in that case. But if you want to give a good testimony, which is always a good idea, okay? If you want to give a good testimony for yourself, you will say, well, I believe that happened to that person, or that this is happening to me, or that this is happening to you, so that me, I, or somebody else, maybe even you, will be brought to heaven. So you can always add, that's a good testimony, even to an unbeliever, sure. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. How does this truth put the events of the world into the proper perspective? Well, I think Rebecca nailed it. That all things that are going on in the world, in some way or another, lead to the most possible number of people being in heaven that could be possibly in heaven. Now, like as I've said countless times before, it is wonderful to be able to connect the dots. It is wonderful to be able to connect a tornado or a hurricane or something else, some other disaster, or an individual disaster like a cancer or a drunk driver, killing somebody or whatever. It's really great if you can connect that dot directly with this person being in faith, and as far as we know, we can tell, dying in faith and therefore going to heaven. That's great. That's wonderful. Understand, though, that that's the exception rather than the rule. I can do it for a number of individuals. I can even do it for myself in a number of cases, but not every case, and not everybody I've ever met. I can't do that, that has experienced some tragedy or catastrophe. Okay. We find it especially difficult, I think, when, for lack of a better term, our human observation of the person to whom the tragedy or disaster has happened is innocent. And I use that term in quotes because, of course, every human being is a sinner conceived in sin. Okay, we know that. But one of my most difficult funerals was a funeral of a newborn, a couple of days old. It's a neonatal situation. I did the baptism in the Army hospital at Fort Bliss, all suited and gowned all up with a little eyedropper on this kid who was about this big, this baby that was about this big. Did the eyedropper, baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Drove back to the other side of town, got a phone call next day, less than 24 hours, I think. Got a phone call the next day, child didn't make it. Drove back across the mountain, met with the military family to plan funeral. And I was fine. I was fine. I was a rock, boy. And I was explaining all this to them, and, well, this is for the good and all this wonderful thing. And I was just in great shape until we had the funeral at the church, and the funeral director walked in, not rolled in like usual with a coffin, walked in with a coffin about this big. Wow. I lost it. Totally lost it. I became a blood babbling mass. I was a mess. I got it together in time to do the service, but I'm telling you, boy, all of my great explanations and all of my comfort and all of my whatever just went right out the window. So yeah, when it involves a situation like that, we tend to have a problem. We're like Rebecca there. I don't like that. I don't like that. I disapprove. Just so you know, God, I'm disapproving. Yeah. Or some little old lady, gets swept off her porch by a tornado, never heard a fly in her whole life, that kind of thing. Then the dots. How do you connect the dots in those cases? I don't know. I don't think you do, really, unless you're genius. So yeah, go ahead, Suzanne.
Well, bringing up the infant, my question has to do with the past. Well, God said the firstborn is His.
Yeah.
And the sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
On that case, they never had the purification. Would have had the purification of the child or whatever. How do the Jews handle that? If the firstborn dies.
We're not told specifically. My guess is, reading other sections of the Old Testament, my guess is that they would use a verse like this and say, well, God already took His sacrifice.
Oh, okay.
Something along those lines. It's interesting. I was rereading something, we were talking about this on Saturday. We didn't get that far about the slaughter of the innocents, so-called slaughter of the innocents around Bethlehem by Herod the Great. Do you know, and the next Saturday class we have, we'll go into this in more detail, but do you know that Do you know how many saints there are? They're all regarded as saints in the both the Roman and the Greek Orthodox Church. All the infants that were killed by Herod's soldiers are regarded as saints. Okay? Do you know how many? Yeah, I would think, yeah, but no. Anybody got a guess? If you're Roman Catholic or Greek Orthodox, you would know, but 14,000. 14,000 are regarded by the Roman and Greek churches as being the saints, the slaughtered innocents. And the Coptic Church, 144,000. Yeah. The another church, I think the Syrian church, or I think it's a Syrian church, 600,000. Which I think they're really getting way out there in la la land, but even 14 I think is way. Most historians today would say 20, maybe 25, maybe, but that's about it. You got to understand, Bethlehem is a real little town, maybe 7,000 people in the whole town, 10,000 if you really want to stretch it. So anyway, but we'll talk about that at the time. Okay, just a couple of points more. We must remember, point C, that it was man who separated himself from God and pulled the entire creation with him and fall into sin. Thus, this consecration of the firstborn symbolizes God bringing about a return of mankind back into relationship to him. So this is the first thing you have to know about this. This is the next step in the plan of salvation. And of course, the plan of salvation, and it relates to the question that we were going to talk about today before we got into revivals and stuff. The plan of salvation, again, remember what the point is. The point of the plan of salvation is to bring mankind back together with God so that man and God can live together for eternity. Now, you can say, well, the whole plan is to save man. Well, yeah, but save man for what? Save mankind for what? Save mankind to be with God. And not because God's lonely, and not because God needs it, but because God wants it. That's God's will. He wants to be together with his Creator, with his creation, created beings. Okay? D, from this it is clear that the 10th plague had not been just some random punishment. It had a very special meaning and purpose. It went to the heart of the problem. That is, that man had separated himself from God by declaring himself independent and therefore choosing to disobey God. Of course, this sin did not begin with man, but with the rebellious angelic beings who then dragged all humanity down with them in the fall. The basic principle and meaning of the Passover was, first and foremost, God's punishment upon disobedient mankind, a kind of capital punishment. Secondly, it emphasized the principle of substitution. This, of course, was not new. It can be seen almost immediately in the fall. The very day that Adam and Eve sinned, God covered them with the skin of an animal that was killed for them. Indeed, it could be said, in their place. In the first Passover, this concept of substitution expanded from protection to individuals to the redemption of an entire nation, and I could continue that sentence and say, to the redemption of the world. And we'll stop there. Yes?
On page 63, of course, the sin did not begin with man, but there was a rebellion before Adam and Eve.
Oh, yeah. Where do you think Satan came from? That's where Satan came from. Yeah, that's where Satan came from. Yeah. Yeah, the angelic beings, 1/3 of them rebelled against God, led by Lucifer, the angel of light, the head of all the angels.
And where is that written? Is that in the Bible or is that in another?
It's in the best place to find it, I think, is in Ezekiel. I'd have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure it's in Ezekiel, and then, of course, Revelation. It talks about 1/3 of the angels. Okay, like I said, we'll pick it up at that time. We'll start with the question of substitution. I just want to emphasize one more thing. It's not very often heard, and I think it's a big mistake on the part of preachers not to bring this up. But again, the animal skins. Remember what Adam and Eve did. Adam and Eve covered themselves with leaves. What's the problem there? They dry and fall off. They're very uncomfortable. Fig leaves in particular. Okay, fig leaves in particular are, anybody ever felt a fig leaf? Oh, wow.
We had a whole tree.
Oh, they can really make a mess of you. Absolutely. They will not replace toilet paper anytime soon. Yes, very much so. So, now, there are Bible believing teachers out there, pastors, professors, whatever, who will tell you that God simply created the animal skins out of nothing. I don't think so. I really don't think so. If he's going to do that, he could do that with, like you say, wool. He could do that with cotton. He could do that with all kinds of things. There's a reason that animal skins are definitely mentioned there, because they came from animals. In other words, God killed an animal, PETA, right? Okay? God killed an animal, PETA, and skinned it, maybe even showed them. I don't know if they lost that particular information in the fall. I don't know. Probably not. But anyway, skinned it and he made clothes. He would have to do what? He would have to kill the animal. He'd have to remove the skin. Okay. He would have to cure the skin, right? All right. Tan it. All right. Make it soft and easily usable for clothes, and sew it together. Okay.
I don't think he made it soft.
You don't.
It's going to be brittle for a while.
Oh, come on. If God makes clothes, I bet you they're really good.
I know, but not for this reason.
Okay, all right.
That brings up the question of, does he remake another one? Because he only made male and female. So if he killed one of them,
Oh no, he made them by the score. He made tons and tons of them. Yeah. They're very often in the plural in the creation account. Ooh, okay, Tony, I'll give you one more, real quick.
Yeah, in the past, I've been telling you that I feel as though that Christianity is coming about throughout the United, because a lot of our entertainers and things like this are writing books.
Yeah.
This morning on Fox, when the 7 o'clock news team signed off, it was on a spiritual message, and they told everyone to go to church.
Yes.
Well, that's good. That's good. You know, maybe we're at the bottom already and we're heading up. I don't know. I don't think so. In my humble opinion as a historian, I'm sorry. I wish I could be more optimistic, but I'm not. So.
I think the point is that we're seeing more and more turn. It's not like we're making the
Well, I think really what's happening, folks, is I think what's really coming about is this. Okay, in other words, yeah, a lot of people are going that direction, but a lot of more people are going the other direction, and what we really got coming is this. Yeah, I think that's what's coming. And talk about war, it's going to be a big one. It's going to be a big one. It's going to make the Civil War look like a picnic. All right, let's close. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all. Amen. Yo, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
tell you this, today's class,
Uh-huh.
of February, you have a candle mass.
Candle mass, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I thought so too. Well, what are you going to do? Oops.